Good morning. Good morning. One of those days. Yeah. One of these days. Used to do the same thing, stay out on the road all of November and December. What? That's a long time to be on the road. A long time to be on the road. Yeah. So good morning. Good morning. Yeah. So today. Good morning, Melissa. Good morning, Melissa. William and Rose already popped on in too. Good morning. Yeah. I'm all blurry. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's hard to tell on this monitor, though. It's hard to tell. So let's see if that works any better. Okay, I think that's better. There we go. You're gonna have to move for the moolah. No, you gotta chase that there. Anyway, so yeah, a little tired after last night. Good gracious, man, epic night last night. Too much fun on Twitch there. It was a very good day. It was a pretty awesome day, actually. A pretty awesome stream. Short story Sunday, and then we had a movie night. Oh my, that movie was ridiculous. Teenagers from Outer Space, so good. And and then Twitch things, and then some other stuff. Yeah. Man, it was, boy, we did a lot of songs on that. It's not really a Christmas sweater. It's I wear this quite a lot, actually, Rose. It's a favorite keeping warm sweater. Keeping warm. Yeah. But yeah, there we go. Let's see, where are we at? We are. We'll get into our story in just a minute there. But yeah, we only got 3 more chapters to go of A Tale of Two Cities. Kind of ending on a Monday here, and I think it's going to be a pretty difficult read. Boy, you want my autograph? Very good. Okay, a little bit of water to get us going. The handsome silver fox. I like that. Well, we shall see. Oh yeah. So let's see. Let me get the link in here for anyone who might not know what we are doing. There we go. This is what we're reading. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It's been a pretty epic story so far. But everyone's connected to everyone. So, but we are at the very end. Charles Darnay scheduled to be executed by Madame Guillotine. After his boy, he's not having a good go of it there. France is well, everywhere he goes, he's being arrested. He got arrested over in England, put on trial for. They accused him of spying for France, and he got off of that. And now he's been put on trial twice over in France for being an aristocrat. Man, it has been a rough go. All right. Up and shared, says Rose. Thank you. Then. Who knows what we are doing? I don't know what we're doing here. We are just waffling a little. Just waffling. Oh, and Sidney Carton just he showed up in France there, and it says he's had his sounds like he's had his moment of clarity, as it were. Gave up the sauce, and they're making a big deal about how he happens to look a lot like Charles Darnay. And that's where we're at. Shall we get right into it? We probably should. I think that's why you are here. Bit of story time. We got people tuning in just to listen to it in the background. That's fine. Well, they go about their busy day, get some work done in the meantime. Let's do it. Let's read. Let me make a little marker here. Alrighty. this is it, the final few chapters, final 3 chapters. A Tale of Two Cities. Let's do it. Chapter 13. 52. In the black prison of the conciergerie, the doomed of the day awaited their fate. They were in numbers as the weeks of the year. 52 were to roll that afternoon on the life tide of the city to the boundless, everlasting sea. Before their cells were quit of them, new occupants were appointed. Before their blood ran into the blood spilled yesterday, the blood that was to mingle with theirs tomorrow was already set apart. 212 were told off. From the farmer general of 70, whose riches could not buy his life, to the seamstress of 20, whose poverty and obscurity could not save her. Physical diseases, engendered in the vices and neglects of men, will seize on victims of all degrees, and the frightful moral disorder, born of unspeakable suffering, intolerable oppression, and heartless indifference, smote equally without distinction. Charles Darnay, alone in a cell, had sustained himself with no flattering delusion since he came to it from the tribunal. In every line of the narrative he had heard his condemnation. He had fully comprehended that no personal influence could possibly save him, that he was virtually sentenced by the millions, and that units could avail him nothing. Nevertheless, it was not easy, with the face of his beloved wife fresh before him, to compose his mind to what it must bear. His hold on life was strong, and it was very, very hard to loosen. By gradual efforts and degrees, unclosed a little here, it clenched the tighter there, and when he brought his strength to bear on that hand, and it yielded, this was closed again. There was a hurry, too, in all his thoughts, a turbulent and heated working of his heart that contended against resignation. If for a moment he did feel resigned, then his wife and child, who had to live after him, seemed to protest and to make it a selfish thing. But all this was at first. Before long, the consideration that there was no disgrace in the fate he must meet, and that numbers went the same road wrongfully, and trod it firmly every day, sprang up to stimulate him. Next followed the thought that much of the future peace of mind, enjoyable by the dear ones, depended on his quiet fortitude. So by degrees he calmed into the better state, when he could raise his thoughts much higher and draw comfort down. Before it had set in dark on the night of his condemnation, he had travelled thus far on his last way. Being allowed to purchase the means of writing and a light, he sat down to write until such time as the prison lamps should be extinguished. He wrote a long letter to Lucie, showing her that he had known nothing of her father's imprisonment until he had heard of it from herself, and that he had been as ignorant as she of his father's and uncle's responsibility for that misery until the paper had been read. He had already explained to her that his concealment from herself of the name he had relinquished was the one condition, fully intelligible now, that her father had attached to their betrothal, and was the one promise he had still exacted on the morning of their marriage. He entreated her, for her father's sake, never to seek to know whether her father had become oblivious of the existence of the paper, or had had it recalled to him, for the moment, or for good, by the story of the tower on that old Sunday under the dear old plane tree in the garden. If he had preserved any definite remembrance of it, there could be no doubt that he had supposed it destroyed with the Bastille, when he had found no mention of it among the relics of prisoners which the populace had discovered there, and which had been described to all the world. He besought her, though he added that he knew it was needless, to console her father, by impressing him through every tender means she could think of, with the truth that he had done nothing for her which he could justly reproach himself, but had uniformly forgotten himself for their joint sakes. Next to her preservation of his own last grateful love and blessing, and her overcoming of her sorrow, to devote herself to their dear child, he adjured her, as they would meet in heaven, to comfort her father. To her father himself, he wrote in the same strain, but he told her father that he expressly confided his wife and child to his care. And he told him this very strongly, with the hope of rousing him from any despondency or dangerous retrospect towards which he foresaw he might be tending. To Mr. Lorry he commended them all, and explained his worldly affairs. That done, with many added sentences of grateful friendship and warm attachment, all was done. He never thought of Carden. His mind was so full of the others that he never once thought of him. He had time to finish these letters before the lights were put out. When he lay down on his straw bed, he thought he had done with this world. But it beckoned him back in his sleep and showed itself in shining forms. Free and happy, back in the old house in Soho, though it had nothing in it like the real house. Unaccountably released and light of heart, he was with Lucie again, and she told him it was all a dream, and he had never gone away. A pause of forgetfulness, and then he had even suffered and had come back to her, dead and at peace, and yet there was no difference in him. Another pause of oblivion, and he awoke in the sombre morning, unconscious where he was or what had happened, until it flashed upon his mind, "This is the day of my death." Thus had he come through the hours to the day when the 52 heads were to fall. And now, while he was composed, and hoped he could meet the end with quiet heroism, a new action began in his waking thoughts, which was very difficult to master. He had never seen the instrument that was to terminate his life. How high it was from the ground, how many steps it had, where he would be stood, how he would be touched, whether the touching hands would be dyed red, which way his face would be turned, whether he would be the first or might be the last. These and many similar questions, in no wise directed by his will, obtruded themselves over and over again, countless times. Neither were they connected with fear. He was conscious of no fear. Rather, they originated in a strange, besetting desire to know what to do when the time came, a desire gigantically disproportionate to the few swift moments to which it referred, a wondering that was more like the wondering of some other spirit within his than his own. The hours went on as he walked to and fro, and the clock struck the numbers he would never hear again. 9, gone forever. 10, gone forever. 11, gone forever. 12, coming on to pass away. After a hard contest with that eccentric action of thought which had last perplexed him, he had got the better of it. He walked up and down, softly repeating their names to himself. The worst of the strife was over. He could walk up and down, free from distracting fancies, praying for himself and for them. 12, gone forever. He had been apprised that the final hour was 3, and he knew he would be summoned some time earlier, inasmuch as the tumbrils jolted heavily and slowly through the streets. Therefore he resolved to keep 2 before his mind as the hour, and so to strengthen himself in the interval that he might be able, after that time, to strengthen others. Walking regularly to and fro, with his arms folded on his breast, a very different man from the prisoner who had walked to and fro at La Force, he heard one struck away from him without surprise. The hour had measured like most other hours. Devoutly thankful to heaven for his recovered self-possession, he thought, "There is but another now," and turned to walk again. Footsteps in the stone passage outside the door. He stopped. The key was put in the lock and turned. Before the door was opened, or as it opened, a man said in a low voice, in English. "He's never seen me here. I've kept out of his way. Go you and alone." Oh, no, that's the other guy. "He's never seen me here. I've kept out of his way. Go you and alone. I wait near. Lose no time." The door was quickly opened and closed, and there stood before him, face to face, quiet, intent upon him, and with the light of a smile on his features, and a cautionary finger on his lip, Sidney Carton. There was something so bright and remarkable in his look that, for the first moment, the prisoner misdoubted him to be an apparition of his own imagining. But he spoke, and it was his voice. He took the prisoner's hand, and it was his real grasp. "Of all the people upon earth, you least expected to see me," he said. "I could not believe it to be you. I can scarcely believe it now. You are not—" The apprehension came suddenly into his mind. "A prisoner?" "No. I'm accidentally possessed of a power over one of the keepers here, and in virtue of it I stand before you. I come from her, your wife, dear Darnay." The prisoner wrung his hand. "I bring you a request from her." "What is it?" "A most earnest, pressing, and emphatic entreaty, addressed to you in the most pathetic tones of the voice so dear to you that you well remember." The prisoner turned his face partly aside. "You have no time to ask me why I bring it, or what it means. I have no time to tell you. You must comply with it. Take off those boots you wear and draw on these of mine." "Yeah, I'm waiting for 2020 to be gone with." There was a chair against the wall of the cell behind the prisoner. Carton, pressing forward, had already, with the speed of lightning, got him down into it and stood over him, barefoot. "Draw on these boots of mine. Put your hands to them. Put your will to them. Quick." "Carton, there's no escaping from this place. It can never be done. You will only die with me. It's madness." "It would be madness if I asked you to escape. But do I? When I ask you to pass out of that door, tell me it is madness and remain here. Change that cravat for this of mine. Take that coat for this of mine. While you do it, let me take this ribbon from your hair and shake out your hair like this of mine." With wonderful quickness and with a strength both of will and action that appeared quite supernatural, he forced all these changes upon him. The prisoner was like a young child in his hands. "Carton, dear Carton, it is madness. It cannot be accomplished. It can never be done. It has been attempted and has always failed. I implore you not to add your death to the bitterness of mine." "Do I ask you, my dear Darnay, to pass the door? When I ask that, refuse. There are pen and ink and paper on this table. Is your hand steady enough to write?" "Well, it was when you came in." "Steady it again, and write what I will dictate. Quick, friend, quick." Pressing his hand to his bewildered head, Darnay sat down at the table. Carton, with his right hand in his breast, stood close beside him. "Write exactly as I speak." To whom do I address it?" "To no one." Carton still had his hand in his breast. "Do I date it?" "No." The prisoner looked up at each question, Carton standing over him, with his hand in his breast, looking down. "If you remember," said Carton, dictating, "the words that passed between us long ago, you will readily comprehend this when you see it. You do remember them, I know. It's not in your nature to forget them." He was drawing his hand from his breast. The prisoner, chancing to look up in his hurried wonder as he wrote, the hand stopped, closing upon something. "Have you written 'forget them'?" Carton asked. "I have. Is that a weapon in your hand?" "No, I'm not armed." "What is in your hand?" "You shall know directly. Write on. There are but few words more." He dictated again. I'm thankful that the time has come when I can prove them. That I do so is no subject for regret or grief. As he said these words, with his eyes fixed on the writer, his hand slowly and softly moved down close to the writer's face. The pen dropped from Darnay's fingers on the table, and he looked about him vacantly. What vapor is that?" he asked. "Vapor? Something that crossed me." "I'm conscious of nothing. There can be nothing here. Take up the pen and finish. Hurry." As if his memory were impaired, or his faculties disordered, the prisoner made an effort to rally his attention. As he looked at Carton with clouded eyes, and with an altered manner of breathing, Carton, his hand again in his breast, looked steadily at him. "Hurry, hurry." The prisoner bent over the paper once more. "If it had been otherwise," Carton's hand was again watchfully and softly stealing down, "I never should have used the longer opportunity. If it had been otherwise." The hand was at the prisoner's face. "I should but have had so much the more to answer for. If it had been otherwise." Carton looked at the pen and saw it was trailing off into unintelligible signs. Carton's hand moved back to his breast no more. The prisoner sprang up with a reproachful look, but Carton's hand was close and firm at his nostrils. Excuse me. And Carton's left arm caught him round the waist. For a few seconds he faintly struggled with the man who had come to lay down his life for him, but within a minute or so he was stretched insensible on the ground. Quickly, but with hands as true as the purpose as his heart was, Carton dressed himself in the clothes the prisoner had laid aside, combed back his hair, and tied it with the ribbon the prisoner had worn. Then he softly called, "Enter there, come in," and the spy presented himself. "You see," said Carton, looking up as he kneeled on one knee beside the insensible figure, putting the paper in the breast, "is your hazard very great?" "Mr. Carton," the spy answered with a timid snap of his fingers, "my hazard is not that. In the thick of business here, if you are true to the whole of your bargain." "Don't fear me. I will be true to the death." "You must be, Mr. Carton, if the tale of 52 is to be right. Being made right by you in that dress, I shall have no fear." "Have no fear. I shall soon be out of the way of harming you, and the rest will be soon far gone from here, please God. Now get assistance and take me to the coach." "You?" said the spy nervously. "Him, man, him with whom I have exchanged. You go out at the gate by which you brought me in?" "Of course." "I was weak and faint when you brought me in, and I'm fainter now you take me out. The parting interview has overpowered me. Such a thing has happened here, often and too often. Your life is in your own hands. Quick, call assistance." "You swear not to betray me?" said the trembling spy as he paused for a last moment. Man," returned Carton, stamping his foot, "have I sworn by no solemn vow already to go through with this, that you waste the precious moments now? Take him yourself to the courtyard you know of, place him yourself in the carriage, show yourself to Mr. Lorry, tell him yourself to give him no restorative but air, and to remember my words of last night, and his promise of last night, and drive away." The spy withdrew, and Carton seated himself at the table, resting his forehead on his hands. The spy returned immediately with 2 men. "How then?" said one of them, contemplating the fallen figure. "So afflicted to find that his friend has drawn a prize in the lottery of St. Guillotine?" "A good patriot," said the other, "could hardly have been more afflicted if the aristocrat had drawn a blank." They raised the unconscious figure, placed it on a litter they had brought to the door, and bent to carry it away. "The time is short, Evremond," said the spy in a warning voice.
I know it well, answered Carton. Be careful of my friend, I entreat you, and leave me.
Come then, my children, said Barsad.
Lift him and come away.
The door closed, and Carton was left alone. Straining his powers of listening to the utmost, he listened for any sound that might denote suspicion or alarm. There was none. Keys turned, doors clashed, footsteps passed along distant passages. No cry was raised or hurry made that seemed unusual. Breathing more freely in a little while, he sat down at the table and listened again until the clock struck 2. Sounds that he was not afraid of, for he divined their meanings, then began to be audible. 7 doors were opened in succession, and finally his own. A jailer, with a list in his hand, looked in, merely saying, "Follow me, Evrémonde," and he followed into a large dark room at a distance. It was a dark winter day, and what with the shadows within, and what with the shadows without, he could but dimly discern the others who were brought there to have their arms bound. Some were standing, some seated. Some were lamenting and in restless motion, but these were few. The great majority were silent and still, looking fixedly at the ground. As he stood by the wall in a dim corner, while some of the 52 were brought in after him, one man stopped in passing to embrace him as having a knowledge of him. It thrilled him with a great dread of discovery, but the man went on. A very few moments later, a young woman with a slight girlish form, a sweet spare face in which there was no vestige of color, and large, widely opened, patient eyes, rose from the seat where he had observed her sitting, and came to speak to him.
"Citizen Evrémonde," she said, touching him with her cold hand, "I am a poor little seamstress who was with you in La Force."
He murmured for answer,
"True. I forget what you were accused of."
"Plots, though the just heaven knows that I am innocent of any. Is it likely? Who would think of plotting with a poor, weak creature like me?"
The forlorn smile with which she said it so touched him that tears started from his eyes.
"I am not afraid to die, Citizen Evrémonde, but I have done nothing. I am not unwilling to die if the Republic, which is to do so much good to us poor, will profit by my death. But I do not know how that can be, Citizen Evrémonde, such a poor, weak little creature."
As the last thing on earth that his heart was to warm and soften to, it warmed and softened to this pitiable girl.
"I heard you were released, Citizen Evrémonde. I hoped it was true."
"It was. I was taken again and condemned."
"If I may ride with you, Citizen Evrémonde, will you let me hold your hand? I'm not afraid, but I am little and weak, and it will give me more courage."
As the patient eyes were lifted to his face, he saw a sudden doubt in them, and then astonishment. He pressed the work-worn, hunger-worn young fingers and touched his lips.
"Are you dying for him?"
she whispered.
"And his wife and child. Hush, yes."
"Oh, you will let me hold your brave hand, stranger?"
"Hush. Yes, my poor sister, to the last."
The same shadows that are falling on the prison are falling in that same hour of the early afternoon on the barrier, with the crowd about it, when a coach going out of Paris drives up to be examined.
"Who goes there? Whom have we within? Papers?"
The papers are handed out and read.
"Alexandre Manette, physician, French. Which is he?"
This is he, the helpless, inarticulately murmuring, wandering old man pointed out.
"Apparently the citizen doctor is not in his right mind. The revolution fever will have been too much for him."
Greatly too much for him.
"Ah, many suffer with it. Lucie, his daughter, French. Which is she?"
This is she. Apparently it must be. Lucie, the wife of Evremond, is it not? It is. Ah, Evremond has an assignation elsewhere. Lucie, her child, English. This is she. She and no other. Kiss me, child of Evremond. Now thou hast kissed a good Republican, something new in thy family. Remember it. Sidney Carton, advocate, English. Which is he? He lies here in this corner of the carriage. He, too, is pointed out. Apparently the English advocate is in a swoon. It is hoped he will recover in the fresher air. It is represented that he is not in strong health, and has separated sadly from a friend who is under the displeasure of the Republic. Is that all? It's not a great deal, that. Many are under the displeasure of the Republic, and must look out at the little window. Jarvis Lorry, banker, English, which is he? I am he, necessarily being the last. It is Jarvis Lorry who has replied to all the previous questions. It is Jarvis Lorry who has alighted and stands with his hand on the coach door, replying to a group of officials. They leisurely walk round the carriage and leisurely mount the box to look at what little luggage it carries on the roof. The country people, hanging about, press nearer to the coach doors and greedily stare in. A little child, carried by its mother, has its short arm held out for it, that it may touch the wife of an aristocrat who has gone to the guillotine. Behold your papers, Jarvis Lorry, countersigned. One can depart, citizen. One can depart. Forward, my postilions. A good journey. I salute you, citizens, and the first danger past. These are again the words of Jarvis Lorry as he clasps his hands and looks upward. There is terror in the carriage. There is weeping. There is the heavy breathing of the insensible traveller. Are we not going too slowly? Can they not be induced to go faster? Asks Lucie, clinging to the old man. It would seem like flight, my darling. I must not urge them too much. It would rouse suspicion. Look back and see if we are pursued. The road is clear, my dearest. So far we are not pursued. Houses and twos and threes pass by us, solitary farms, ruinous buildings, dye works, tanneries, and the like, open country, avenues of leafless trees. The hard, uneven pavement is under us. The soft, deep mud is on either side. Sometimes we strike into the skirting mud to avoid the stones that clatter us and shake us. Sometimes we stick in ruts and sloughs there. The agony of our impatience is then so great that in our wild alarm and hurry we are for getting out and running, hiding, doing anything but stopping. Out of the open country, in again among ruinous buildings, solitary farms, dye works, tanneries, and the like, cottages in twos and threes, avenues of leafless trees. Have these men deceived us and taken us back by another road? Is not this the same place twice over? Thank heaven, no. A village. Look back, and see if we are pursued. Hush, the posting-house. Leisurely our 4 horses are taken out. Leisurely the coach stands in the little street, bereft of horses and with no likelihood upon it of ever moving again. Leisurely the new horses come into visible existence, one by one. Leisurely the new postilions follow, sucking and plaiting the lashes of their whips. Leisurely the old postilions count their money, make wrong additions, and arrive at dissatisfied results. All the time, our overfraught hearts are beating at a rate that would far outstrip the fastest gallop of the fastest horses ever foaled. At length the new postilions are in their saddles, and the old are left behind. We are through the village, up the hill and down the hill, and on the low watery grounds. Suddenly the postilions exchange speech with animated gesticulation, and the horses are pulled up, almost on their haunches. We are pursued. Oh, within the carriage there. Speak then. That's not very French sounding. What is it? Asks Mr. Lorry, looking out at the window.
How many did they say?
I do not understand you.
At the last post, how many to the guillotine today?
52.
Ah, I said so. A brave number. My fellow citizen here would have it 42. 10 more heads are worth having. The guillotine goes handsomely. I love it. High forward! Whoop!
The night comes on dark. He moves more. He's beginning to revive and to speak intelligibly. He thinks they are still together. He asks him by his name what he has in his hand. Oh, pity us, kind heaven, and help us. Look out, and see if we are pursued. The wind is rushing after us, and the clouds are flying after us, and the moon is plunging after us, and the whole wild night is in pursuit of us. But so far we are pursued by nothing else. Man. Boy, oh boy, things are looking pretty grim for Mr. Sidney Carton. Indeed, indeed. Let's let us continue there. Oh boy, everyone's talking about their food, what they're eating for lunch. A big chef salad with Italian dressing and ham and turkey for the meat. Yeah, there we go. Like it. Very good. Here we go. Chapter 14. The Knitting Done. In that same juncture of time, when the 52 awaited their fate, Madame Defarge held darkly ominous counsel with the Vengeance and Jacques III of the Revolutionary Jury. Not in the wine-shop did Madame Defarge confer with these ministers, but in the shed of the wood sawyer, erst a mender of roads. The sawyer himself did not participate in the conference, but abided at a little distance, like an outer satellite who was not to speak until required, or to offer an opinion until invited.
"But our Defarge," said Jacques III, "is undoubtedly a good Republican, eh?"
"There's no better," the voluble Vengeance protested in her shrill notes, "in France."
"Peace, little Vengeance," said Madame Defarge, laying her hand with a slight frown on her lieutenant's lips. "Hear me speak. My husband, fellow citizen, is a good Republican, and a bold man. He has deserved well of the Republic, and possesses its confidence. But my husband has his weaknesses, and he is so weak as to relent towards this doctor."
"It is a great pity," croaked Jacques III, dubiously shaking his head, with his cruel fingers at his hungry mouth. He's always eating his fingers.
"It is not quite like a good citizen. It is a thing to regret." "See you," said Madame, "I care nothing for this doctor. He may wear his head or lose it. For any interest I have in him, it is all one to me. But the Evremond people are to be exterminated, and the wife and child must follow the husband and father."
"She has a fine head for it," croaked Jacques III.
"I have seen blue eyes and golden hair there, and they look charming when Samson held them up."
Ogre that he was, he spoke like an epicure. Madame Defarge cast down her eyes and reflected a little.
"The child also," observed Jacques III, with a meditative enjoyment of his words, "has golden hair and blue eyes, and we seldom have a child there. It is a pretty sight." "In a word," said Madame Defarge, coming out of her short abstraction, "I cannot trust my husband in this matter. Not only do I feel, since last night, that I dare not confide to him the details of my projects, but also I feel that if I delay, there is danger of his giving warning, and then they might escape."
"That must never be," croaked Jacques III.
"No one must escape. We have not half enough as it is. We ought to have 60 a day." "In a word," Madame Defarge went on, "my husband is not my reason for pursuing this family to annihilation.
and I have not his reason for regarding this doctor with any sensibility. I must act for myself, therefore. Come hither, little citizen."
The wood sawyer, who held her in the respect and himself in the submission of mortal fear, advanced with his hand to his red cap.
"Touching those signals, little citizen," said Madame Defarge sternly, "that she made to the prisoners, you are ready to bear witness to them this very day?"
"Aye, aye, why not?" cried the sawyer. "Every day, in all weathers from 2 to 4, always signalling. Sometimes with the little one, sometimes without. I know what I know. I've seen it with my own eyes." He made all manner of gestures while he spoke, as if in incidental imitation of some few of the great diversity of signals that he had never seen. "Clearly plots," said Jacques Three, "transparently."
"There is no doubt of the jury?"
inquired Madame Defarge, letting her eyes turn to him with a gloomy smile. "Rely upon the patriotic jury, dear citizeness. I answer for my fellow jurymen."
"Now, let me see," said Madame Defarge, pondering again. "Yet once more, can I spare this doctor to my husband? I have no feeling either way. Can I spare him?"
"He would count as one head," observed Jacques Three in a low voice. "We really have not heads enough. It would be a pity, I think. That's right, P.W. It's going to be a sad day."
He was signaling with her when I saw her," argued Madame Defarge. "I cannot speak of one without the other, and I must not be silent and trust the case wholly to him, this little citizen here, for I am not a bad witness."
The Vengeance and Jacques Three vied with each other in their fervent protestations that she was the most admirable and marvelous of witnesses. The little citizen, not to be outdone, declared her to be a celestial witness.
"He must take his chance," said Madame Defarge. "No, I cannot spare him. You are engaged at 3 o'clock. You are going to see the batch today executed. You?"
The question was addressed to the wood sawyer, who hurriedly replied in the affirmative, seizing the occasion to add that he was the most ardent of Republicans, and that he would be, in effect, the most desolate of Republicans if anything prevented him from enjoying the pleasure of smoking his afternoon pipe in the contemplation of the droll national barber. He was so very demonstrative herein that he might have been suspected, perhaps was, by the dark eyes that looked contemptuously at him out of Madame Defarge's head, of having his small individual fears for his own personal safety every hour in the day.
"I," said Madame, "am equally engaged at the same place. After it is over, say at 8 tonight, come you to me in Saint Antoine, and we will give information against these people at my section."
The wood sawyer said he would be proud and flattered to attend the citizeness. The citizeness, looking at him, he became embarrassed. What? The citizeness looking at him, he became embarrassed, evaded her glance as a small dog would have done, retreated among his wood, and hid his confusion over the handle of his saw. Madame Defarge beckoned the juryman and the Vengeance a little nearer to the door, and there expounded her further views to them thus.
"She will now be at home, awaiting the moment of his death. She will be mourning and grieving. She will be in a state of mind to impeach the justice of the Republic. She will be full of sympathy with its enemies. I will go to her."
"What an admirable woman! What an admirable woman!" exclaimed Jacques Three rapturously.
"Ah, my cherished!"
cried the Vengeance, and embraced her.
"Take you my knitting," said Madame Defarge, placing it upon her lieutenant's hands, "and have it ready for me in my usual seat. Keep me my usual chair. Go you there straight, for there will probably be a greater concourse than usual today."
"I willingly obey the orders of my chief," said the Vengeance with alacrity, and kissing her cheek. "You will not be late."
I shall be there before the commencement. And before the tumbrils arrive? Be sure you are, my soul, said the Vengeance, calling after her, for she had already turned into the street. Before the tumbrils arrive.
Madame Defarge slightly waved her hand to imply that she heard, and might be relied upon to arrive in good time, and so went through the mud and round the corner of the prison wall. The Vengeance and the jurymen, looking after her as she walked away, were highly appreciative of her fine figure and her superb moral endowments. There were many women at that time upon whom the hand There were many women at that time upon whom the time laid a dreadfully disfiguring hand, but there was not one among them more to be dreaded than this ruthless woman, now taking her way along the streets. Of a strong and fearless character, of shrewd sense and readiness, of great determination, of that kind of beauty which not only seems to impart to its possessor firmness and animosity, but to strike into others an instinctive recognition of those qualities. The troubled time would have heaved her up under any circumstances. But, imbued from her childhood with a brooding sense of wrong and an inveterate hatred of a class, opportunity had developed her into a tigress. She was absolutely without pity. If she had ever had the virtue in her, it had gone quite out of her. It was nothing to her that an innocent man was to die for the sins of his forefathers. She saw not him, but them. It was nothing to her that his wife was to be made a widow, and his daughter an orphan. That was insufficient punishment, because they were her natural enemies, and her prey, and as such had no right to live. To appeal to her was made hopeless by her having no sense of pity, even for herself. If she had been laid low in the streets, if any of the many encounters in which she had been engaged, she would not have pitied herself, nor if she had been ordered to the axe tomorrow, would she have gone to it with any softer feeling than a fierce desire to change places with the man who sent her there. Such a heart Madame Defarge carried under her rough robe. Carelessly worn, it was a becoming robe enough, in a certain weird way, and her dark hair looked rich under her coarse red cap. Lying hidden in her bosom was a loaded pistol. Lying hidden at her waist was a sharpened dagger. Thus accoutred, and walking with the confident tread of such a character, and with the supple freedom of a woman who had habitually walked in her girlhood barefoot and bare-legged on the brown sea sand, Madame Defarge took her way along the streets. Now, when the journey of the travelling coach, at that very moment waiting for the completion of its load, had been planned out last night, the difficulty of taking Miss Pross in it had much engaged Mr. Lorry's attention. It was not merely desirable to avoid overloading the coach, but it was of the highest importance that the time occupied in examining it and its passengers should be reduced to the utmost, since their escape might depend on the saving of only a few seconds here and there. Finally, he had proposed, after anxious consideration, that Miss Pross and Jerry, who were at liberty to leave the city, should leave it at 3 o'clock in the lightest wheeled conveyance known to that period. Unencumbered with luggage, they would soon overtake the coach, and passing it, and preceding it on the road, would order its horses in advance, and greatly facilitate its progress during the precious hours of the night, when delay was the most to be dreaded. Seeing in this arrangement the hope of rendering real service in that pressing emergency, Miss Pross hailed it with joy. She and Jerry had beheld the coach start, had known who it was that Solomon brought, had passed some 10 minutes in tortures of suspense, and were now concluding their arrangements to follow the coach, even as Madame Defarge, taking her way through the streets, now drew nearer and nearer to the else deserted lodging in which they held their consultation.
"Now what do you think, Mr. Cruncher?"
said Miss Pross, whose agitation was so great that she could hardly speak, or stand, or move, or live. "What do you think about not starting from this courtyard? Another carriage having already gone here today, it might awaken suspicion."
That's Jerry. "My opinion, miss," returned Mr. Cruncher, "is as you're right. Likewise, I'll stand by you, right or wrong."
"I'm so distracted with fear and hope for our precious creatures," said Miss Pross, wildly crying, "that I'm incapable of forming any plan. Are you capable of forming any plan, my dear good Mr. Cruncher?"
"Respecting a future spare of life, miss," returned Mr. Cruncher, "I hope so. Respecting any present use of this here blessed old head of mine, I think not. Would you do me the favour, miss, to take notice of two promises and wows what it is my wish... What? Take note of two promises and wows what it is my wishes. For to record in this... Good Lord, let's read that again. Would you do me the favour, miss, to take notice of two promises and wows what it is my wishes for to record in this here crisis? I don't know what's going on.
"Oh, for gracious sake," cried Miss Pross, still wildly crying, "record them at once and get them out of the way, like an excellent man."
First," said Mr. Cruncher, who was all in a tremble, and who spoke with an ashy and solemn visage, "them poor things well out of this. Never no more will I do it. Never no more."
"I'm quite sure, Mr. Cruncher," returned Miss Pross, "that you will never do it again, whatever it is, and I beg you not to think it necessary to mention more particularly what it is."
"Oh, no, miss," returned Jerry, "it shall not be named to you. Second, them poor things well out of this, and never no more will I interfere with Mrs. Cruncher's flopping. Never no more."
"Whatever housekeeping arrangement that may be," said Miss Pross, striving to dry her eyes and compose herself, "I have no doubt it's best that Mrs. Cruncher should have it entirely under her own superintendence. Oh, my poor darlings!"
"I go so far as to say, miss, moreover," proceeded Mr. Cruncher, with a most alarming tendency to hold forth as from a pulpit, "and let my words be took down and took to Mrs. Cruncher through yourself, that what my opinions respectin' floppins has undergone a change, and that what I only hope, with all my heart, as Mrs. Cruncher may be a floppin' at the present time."
"Oh, there, there, there! I hope she is, my dear man," cried the distracted Miss Pross, "and I hope she finds it answering her expectations."
"Forbid it," proceeded Mr. Cruncher, with additional solemnity, additional slowness, and additional tendency to hold forth and hold out, "forbid it, as anything what I have ever said or done should be visited on my earnest wishes for them poor creatures now. Forbid it, as we shouldn't all flop, if it was anyways convenient, to get 'em out of this here dismal risk. Forbid it, miss. What I say, forbid it." This was Mr. Cruncher's conclusion, after a protracted but vain endeavour to find a better one. And still Madame Defarge, pursuing her way along the streets, came nearer and nearer.
"If we ever get back to our native land," said Miss Pross, you may rely upon my telling Mrs. Cruncher as much as I may be able to remember and understand of what you have so impressively said, and at all events you may be sure that I shall bear witness to your being thoroughly in earnest at this dreadful time. Now pray let us think. My esteemed Mr. Cruncher, let us think."
Still Madame Defarge, pursuing her way along the streets, came nearer and nearer.
"If you were to go before," said Miss Pross, "and stop the vehicle and horses from coming here, and were to wait somewhere for me, wouldn't that be best?"
Mr. Cruncher thought it might be best.
"Where could you wait for me?" asked Miss Pross.
Mr. Cruncher was so bewildered that he could think of no locality but Temple Bar. But, alas, Temple Bar was hundreds of miles away, and Madame Defarge was drawing very near indeed.
"Oh, by the cathedral door," said Miss Pross. Would it be too much out of the way to take me in near the great cathedral door between the two towers?
No, miss, answered Mr. Cruncher.
Then go like the best of men, said Miss Pross. Go to the posting-house straight and make that change.
I am doubtful, said Mr. Cruncher, hesitating and shaking his head. About leaving of you, you see. We don't know what may happen.
Oh, heaven knows we don't, returned Miss Pross, but have no fear for me. Take me in the cathedral at 3 o'clock, or as near it you can, and I'm sure it will be better than our going from here. I feel certain of it. There, bless you, Mr. Cruncher. Think not of me, but of the lives that may depend on both of us.
This exordium, let's look that word up, this exordium. Exordium, the beginning or introductory part, especially of a discourse or treatise. Start. This exordium, and Miss Pross's 2 hands in quite agonized entreaty clasping his, decided Mr. Cruncher. With an encouraging nod or two, he immediately went out to alter the arrangements, and left her by herself to follow as she had proposed. The having originated a precaution, which was already in course of execution, was a great relief to Miss Pross. The necessity of composing her appearance so that it should attract no special notice in the streets was another relief. She looked at her watch, and it was 20 minutes past 2. She had no time to lose, but must get ready at once. Afraid, in her extreme perturbation, of the loneliness of the deserted rooms, and of half-imagined faces peeping from behind every open door in them, Miss Pross got a basin of cold water, and began laving her eyes, which were swollen and red. "Good morning, Bag That Money." Good morning, sir. How you doing? Haunted by her feverish apprehensions, she could not bear to have her sight obscured for a minute at a time by the dripping water, but constantly paused and looked round to see that there was no one watching her. In one of those pauses she recoiled and cried out, for she saw a figure standing in the room. The basin fell to the ground broken, and the water flowed to the feet of Madame Defarge. By strange, stern ways, and through much staining blood, those feet had come to meet that water. Madame Defarge looked coldly at her, and said, "The wife of Evrémonde, where is she?" It flashed upon Miss Pross's mind that the doors were all standing open, and would suggest the flight. Her first act was to shut them. There were 4 in the room, and she shut them all. She then placed herself before the door of the chamber which Lucie had occupied. Madame Defarge's eyes followed her through this rapid movement, and rested on her when it was finished. Miss Pross had nothing beautiful about her. Years had not tamed the wildness or softened the grimness of her appearance. But she, too, was a determined woman, in her different way, and she measured Madame Defarge with her eyes, every inch. "You might, from your appearance, be the wife of Lucifer," said Miss Pross in her breathing. "Nevertheless, you shall not get the better of me. I am an Englishwoman." Madame Defarge looked at her scornfully, but still with something of Miss Pross's own perception that they, too, were at bay. She saw a tight, hard, wiry woman before her, as Mr. Lorry had seen in the same figure a woman with a strong hand in the years gone by. She knew full well that Miss Pross was the family's devoted friend. Miss Pross knew full well that Madame Defarge was the family's malevolent enemy. "On my way yonder," said Madame Defarge, with a slight movement of her hand towards the fatal spot, "where they reserve my chair and my knitting for me, I am come to make my compliments to her in passing. I wish to see her." "I know that your intentions are evil," said Miss Pross, "and you may depend upon it I'll hold my own against them." Each spoke in her own language. Neither understood the other's words. Both were very watchful, and intent to deduce from look and manner what the unintelligible words meant.
"It will do her no good to keep herself concealed from me at this moment," said Madame Defarge. "Good patriots will know what that means. Let me see her. Go tell her that I wish to see her. Do you hear?"
"If those eyes of yours were bed-winches," returned Miss Pross, "and I was an English four-poster, they shouldn't lose a splinter of me. No, you wicked foreign woman, I am your match." Madame Defarge was not likely to follow those idiomatic remarks in detail, but she so far understood them as to perceive that she was set at naught.
"Woman imbecile and pig-like," said Madame Defarge, frowning. "I take no answer from you. I demand to see her. Either tell her that I demand to see her, or stand out of the way of the door and let me go to her."
This with an angry explanatory wave of her right arm.
"I little thought," said Miss Pross, "that I should ever want to understand your nonsensical language, but I would give all I have, except the clothes I wear, to know whether you suspect the truth or any part of it."
Neither of them for a single moment released the other's eyes. Madame Defarge had not moved from the spot where she stood when Miss Pross first became aware of her, but she now advanced one step.
"I am a Briton," said Miss Pross. "I'm desperate. I don't care an English tuppence for myself. I know that the longer I keep you here, the greater hope there is for my ladybird. I'll not leave a handful of that dark hair upon your head if you lay a finger on me."
Thus Miss Pross, with a shake of her head and a flash of her eyes between every rapid sentence, and every rapid sentence a whole breath. Thus Miss Pross, who had never struck a blow in her life. But her courage was of that emotional nature that it brought the irrepressible tears into her eyes. This was a courage that Madame Defarge so little comprehended as to mistake for weakness.
"Ah!" she laughed. "You poor wretch! What are you worth? I address myself to that doctor."
Then she raised her voice and called out,
"Citizen Doctor, wife of Evremont, child of Evremont, any person but this miserable fool, answer the Citizeness Defarge."
Perhaps the following silence, perhaps some latent disclosure in the expression of Miss Pross's face, perhaps a sudden misgiving apart from either suggestion, whispered to Madame Defarge that they were gone. 3 of the doors she opened swiftly and looked in.
"Those rooms are all in disorder. There has been hurried packing. There are odds and ends upon the ground. There is no one in that room behind you. Let me look."
"Never," said Miss Pross, who understood the request as perfectly as Madame Defarge understood the answer.
"If they are not in that room, they are gone, and can be pursued and brought back," said Madame Defarge to herself. "As long as you don't know whether they are in that room or not, you are uncertain what to do," said Miss Pross to herself. "And you shall not know that, if I can prevent your knowing it, and know that, or not know that, you shall not leave here while I can hold you. I have been in the streets from the first. Nothing has stopped me. I will tear you to pieces, but I will have you from that door," said Madame Defarge. "We are alone at the top of a high house in a solitary courtyard. We are not likely to be heard, and I pray for bodily strength to keep you here, whilst every minute you are here is worth 100,000 guineas to my darling," said Miss Pross.
This is strangely written. Madame Defarge made at the door. Miss Pross, on the instinct of the moment, seized her round the waist in both her arms, and held her tight. It was in vain for Madame Defarge to struggle and to strike. Miss Pross, with the vigorous tenacity of love, always so much stronger than hate, clasped her tight, and even lifted her from the floor in the struggle that they had. The 2 hands of Madame Defarge buffeted and tore her face, but Miss Pross, with her head down, held her round the waist and clung to her with more than the hold of a drowning woman. Soon Madame Defarge's hands ceased to strike and felt at her encircled waist. "It's under my arm," said Miss Pross in smothered tones. "You shall not draw it. I'm stronger than you. I bless heaven for it. I hold you till one or other of us faints or dies." Madame Defarge's hands were at her bosom. Miss Pross looked up, saw what it was, struck at it, struck out a flash and a crash, and stood alone, blinded with smoke. All this was in a second. As the smoke cleared, leaving an awful stillness, it passed out on the air, like the soul of the furious woman whose body lay lifeless on the ground. Oh boy. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's just really, yeah. In the first fright and horror of her situation. In the first fright and horror of her situation, Miss Pross passed the body as far from it as she could, and ran down the stairs to call for fruitless help. Happily, she bethought herself of the consequences of what she did in time to check herself and go back. It was dreadful to go in at the door again, but she did go in, and even went near it, to get the bonnet and other things that she must wear. These she put on, out on the staircase, first shutting and locking the door, and taking away the key. She then sat down on the stairs a few moments to breathe and to cry, and then got up and hurried away. By good fortune she had a veil on her bonnet, or she could hardly have gone along the streets without being stopped. By good fortune, too, she was naturally so peculiar in appearance as not to show disfigurement like any other woman. She needed both advantages, for the marks of gripping fingers were deep in her face, and her hair was torn, and her dress, hastily composed with unsteady hands, was clutched and dragged 100 ways. "Good morning, Timo. Good morning." In crossing the bridge, she dropped the door key in the river. Arriving at the cathedral some few minutes before her escort, and waiting there, she thought, what if the key were already taken in a net? What if it were identified? What if the door were opened and the remains discovered? What if she were stopped at the gate, sent to prison, and charged with murder? In the midst of these fluttering thoughts, the escort appeared, took her in, and took her away. "Is there any noise in the streets?" she asked him. "Oh, the usual noises," Mr. Cruncher replied, and looked surprised by the question and by her aspect. "I don't hear you," said Miss Pross. "What do you say?" It was in vain for Mr. Cruncher to repeat what he said. Miss Pross could not hear him. "So I'll nod my head," thought Mr. Cruncher, amazed. "At all events she'll see that." And she did. "Is there any noise in the streets now?" asked Miss Pross again presently. Again Mr. Cruncher nodded his head. "I don't hear it." "Gone deaf in an hour," said Mr. Cruncher, ruminating, with his mind much disturbed. "What's come to her?" "I feel," said Miss Pross, "as if there had been a flash and a crash, and that crash was the last thing I should ever hear in this life." "Blest if she ain't in a queer condition," said Mr. Cruncher, more and more disturbed. "What can she be a-taking to keep her courage up? Mark, there's the roll of them dreadful carts. You can hear that, miss." "I can hear," said Miss Pross, seeing that he spoke to her, "nothing. Oh, my good man, there was first a great crash, and then a great stillness, and that stillness seems to be fixed and unchangeable, never to be broken any more as long as my life lasts." "If she don't hear the roll of those dreadful carts, now's very nigh their journey's end," said Mr. Cruncher, glancing over his shoulder. "It's my opinion that indeed she never will hear anything else in this world." And indeed she never did. Well,
Man, oh man, 99% of the way through. There we go. Boy, oh boy. So how's Timo doing today? How you doing, man? Oh, there we go. Melissa and Rose. And BW and Baghdad Money. And they're all here. Man, this is going to be a tricky chapter. Let's do it. The last chapter, the final chapter, the very last one. It was. Well, yeah. I mean, if you have a if you have a, I mean, they were straight. I mean, if they're like pressed up super close together, you have a gun go off, right next to your head. Yeah, you can. It'll do something to your hearing. The footsteps die out forever. Along the Paris streets, the death carts rumble, hollow and harsh. Good morning, Anya. Good morning. 6 tumbrils carry the day's wine to La Guillotine. All the devouring and insatiate monsters imagined since imagination could record itself are fused in the one realization, guillotine. And yet there is not in France, with its rich variety of soil and climate, a blade, a leaf, a root, a sprig, a peppercorn, which will grow to maturity under conditions more certain than those that have produced this horror. Crush humanity out of shape once more under similar hammers, and it will twist itself into the same tortured forms. Sow the same seed of rapacious license and oppression over again, and it will surely yield the same fruit according to its kind. 6 tumbrils roll along the streets. Change these back again to what they were, thou powerful enchanter, Time, and they shall be seen to be the carriages of absolute monarchs, the equipages of feudal nobles, the toilettes of flaring Jezebels, the churches that are not my father's house, but dens of thieves, the huts of millions of starving peasants. No, the great magician who majestically works out the appointed order of the Creator never reverses his transformations. If thou be changed into this shape by the will of God, say the seers to the enchanted in the wise Arabian stories, then remain so. But if thou wear this form through mere passing conjuration, then resume thy former aspect. Changeless and hopeless, the tumbrils roll along. As the somber wheels of the 6 carts go round, they seem to plough up a long, crooked furrow among the populace in the streets. Ridges of faces are thrown to this side and to that, and the ploughs go steadily onward. So used are the regular inhabitants of the houses to the spectacle that in many windows there are no people, and in some the occupation of the hands is not so much as suspended, while the eyes survey the faces in the tumbrils. Here and there the inmate has visitors to see the sight. Then he points his finger with something of the complacency of a curator or authorized exponent to this cart and to this, and seems to tell who sat here yesterday and who there the day before. Of the riders in the tumbrils, some observe these things, and all things, on their last roadside, with an impassive stare. Others with a lingering interest in the ways of life and men. Some, seated with drooping heads, are sunk in silent despair. Again, there are some so heedful of their looks that they cast upon the multitude such glances as they have seen in theatres and in pictures. Several close their eyes and think or try to get their straying thoughts together. Only one, and he is a miserable creature, of a crazed aspect, is so shattered and made drunk by horror that he sings and tries to dance.
Not one of the whole number appeals by look or gesture to the pity of the people. There is a guard of sundry horsemen riding abreast of the tumbrils, and faces are often turned up to some of them, and they are asked some question. It would seem to be always the same question, for it is always followed by a press of people towards the third cart. The horsemen abreast of that cart frequently point out one man in it with their swords. The leading curiosity is to know which is he. He stands at the back of the tumbril with his head bent down to converse with a mere girl who sits on the side of the cart and holds his hand. He has no curiosity or care for the scene about him, and always speaks to the girl. Here and there, in the long street of Saint Honore, cries are raised against him. If they move him at all, it is only to a quiet smile, as he shakes his hair a little more loosely about his face. He cannot easily touch his face, his arms being bound. On the steps of a church, awaiting the coming up of the tumbrils, stands the spy and prison sheep. He looks into the first of them. Not there. He looks into the second. Not there. He already asks himself, "Has he sacrificed me?" when his face clears as he looks into the third. "Which is Evremond?" says a man behind him. "That, at the back there." "With his hand in the girl's?" "Yes." The man cries, "Down, Evremond! To the guillotine, all aristocrats! Down, Evremond!" "Hush, hush," the spy entreats him timidly. "And why not, citizen?" "He is going to pay the forfeit. It will be paid in 5 minutes more. Let him be at peace." But the man continuing to exclaim, "Down, Evremond!" the face of Evremond is for a moment turned towards him. Evremond then sees the spy and looks attentively at him, and goes his way. The clocks are on the stroke of 3, and the furrow ploughed among the populace is turning round to come on into the place of execution, and end. The ridges thrown to this side and to that now crumble in and close behind the last plough as it passes on, for all are following to the guillotine. In front of it, seated in chairs, as in a garden of public diversion, are a number of women, busily knitting. On one of the foremost chairs stands the Vengeance, looking about for her friend. "Therese," she cries in her shrill tones, "who has seen her? Therese Defarge." "Oh, she never missed before," says a knitting woman of the sisterhood. "No, nor will she miss now," cries the Vengeance petulantly. "Therese!" "Louder," the woman recommends. "Aye, louder, Vengeance, much louder, and still she will scarcely hear thee. Louder yet, Vengeance, with a little oath or so added, and yet it will hardly bring her. Send other women up and down to seek her, lingering somewhere. And yet, although the messengers have done dread deeds, it is questionable whether of their own wills they will go far enough to find her." "Bad fortune!" cries the Vengeance, stamping her foot in the chair. "And here are the tumbrils, and Evremond will be dispatched in a wink, and she is not here. See her knitting in my hand, and her empty chair ready for her, I cry with vexation and disappointment." As the Vengeance descends from her elevation to do it, the tumbrils begin to discharge their loads. The minister of Saint Guillotine are robed and ready. Crash! A head is held up, and the knitting women who scarcely lifted their eyes to look at it a moment ago, when it could think and speak, count 1. The second tumbril empties and moves on. The third comes up. Crash! And the knitting women, never faltering or pausing in their work, count 2.
The supposed Evremond descends, and the seamstress is lifted out next after him. He has not relinquished her patient hand in getting out, but still holds it, as he promised. He gently places her with her back to the crashing engine that constantly whirs up and falls, and she looks into his face and thanks him.
"But for you, dear stranger, I should not be so composed, for I'm naturally a poor little thing, faint of heart, nor should I have been able to raise my thoughts to him who has put to death, that we might have hope and comfort here today. I think you were sent to me by heaven."
"Or you to me," says Sidney Carton. "Keep your eyes upon me, dear child, mind no other object."
"I mind nothing while I hold your hand. I shall mind nothing when I let it go, if they are rapid."
"They will be rapid, fear not."
The two stand in the fast-thinning throng of victims, but they speak as if they were alone. Eye to eye, voice to voice, hand to hand, heart to heart, these two children of the universal mother, else so wide and differing, have come together on the dark highway to repair home together and to rest in her bosom.
"Brave and generous friend, will you let me ask you one last question? I'm very ignorant, and it troubles me just a little."
"Tell me what it is."
"I have a cousin, an only relative, and an orphan like myself, whom I love very dearly. She's 5 years younger than I, and she lives in a farmer's house in the south country. Poverty parted us, and she knows nothing of my fate, for I cannot write, and if I could, how should I tell her? It is better as it is."
Yes, better as it is."
"What I've been thinking as we came along, and what I'm still thinking now, as I look into your kind, strong face, which gives me so much support, is this. If the Republic really does good to the poor, and they come to be less hungry, and in all ways to suffer less, she may live a long time. She may even live to be old."
"What then, my gentle sister?"
Do you think—"
The uncomplaining eyes, in which there is so much endurance, fill with tears, and the lips part a little more and tremble.
"that it will seem long to me while I wait for her in the better land, where I trust both you and I will be mercifully sheltered?"
"It cannot be, my child. There is no time there, and no trouble there."
"You comfort me so much. I'm so ignorant. Am I to kiss you now? Is the moment come?"
"Yes."
She kisses his lips. He kisses hers. They solemnly bless each other. The spare hand does not tremble as he releases it. Nothing worse than a sweet, bright constancy is in the patient face. She goes next before him, is gone. The knitting women count 22. "I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die." The murmuring of many voices, the upturning of many faces, the pressing on of many footsteps in the outskirts of the crowd, so that it swells forward in a mass like one great heave of water, all flashes away. 23. They said of him, about the city that night, that it was the peacefullest man's face ever beheld there. Many added that he looked sublime and prophetic. One of the most remarkable sufferers by the same axe, a woman, had asked at the foot of the same scaffold, not long before, to be allowed to write down the thoughts that were inspiring her. If he had given any utterance to his, they were prophetic. They would have been these:
"I see Bassard and Cly, Defarge, the vengeance, the juryman, the judge, long ranks of the new oppressors, who have risen on the destruction of the old, perishing by this retributive instrument, before it shall cease out of its present use. I see a beautiful city, and a brilliant people rising from this abyss, and in their struggles to be truly free, in their triumphs and defeats, through long years to come, I see the evil of this time, and of the previous time of which this is the natural birth, gradually making expiation for itself, and wearing out. I see the lives for which I lay down my life, peaceful, useful, prosperous, and happy, in that England which I shall see no more. I see her with a child upon her bosom, who bears my name. I see her father, aged and bent, but otherwise restored, and faithful to all men in his healing office, and at peace. I see the good old man, so long their friend, in 10 years' time, enriching them with all he has, and passing tranquilly to his reward. I see that I hold a sanctuary in their hearts, and in the hearts of their descendants, generations hence. I see her, an old woman, weeping for me on the anniversary of this day. I see her and her husband, their course done, lying side by side in their last earthly bed, and I know that each was not more honored and held sacred in the other's soul than I was in the souls of both. I see that child who lay upon her bosom and who bore my name, a man winning his way up in that path of life which once was mine. I see him winning it so well that my name is made illustrious there by the light of his. I see the blots I threw upon it faded away. I see him, foremost of just judges and honored men, bringing a boy of my name, with a forehead that I know, and golden hair to this place, then fair to look upon, with not a trace of this day's disfigurement. And I hear him tell the child my story, with a tender and faltering voice. It's very sad. It is a far, far better thing that I do, that I've ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. And that's the end. Yeah. Man, sad, very sad. Okay. Yeah. Man. Okay. Boy, that ended on a very, very, very sad note. Okay. But anyway, that was good. That was good. It was a very good story. Very good story. Bloop. And that was that. Ah. How do you get to the end of that without getting a little teary-eyed? Yeah. But anyway, that was that. Tale of Two Cities. Took us 11 days to get through that one. 11 days. Yeah. So what are we going to do now? Well, we still got 30 minutes. We got 30 minutes. We can find something interesting to read for 30 minutes. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, yeah, definitely a bit of a tearjerker ending. And I do want to go see like some movie adaptation of that. Yeah, it was definitely very well written. Yeah. And it kind of had that faltering voice going in it because I was kind of choking up. So it's like, yeah, all right. All right. Let's find some. What do we got? The Moon Bog. What's this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do that. We'll read The Moon Bog. The Moon Bog.
I don't know if we've read this. Don't know about, Very good. Yeah, we could do that, sure. Yeah, we could do that. What one would you like, I guess? Here's a Dreamer's Tales. Blah, blah, blah. The Madness of... Beth Moore has read, we've read that. The Madness of Androsprutz. We can do that, yeah. We'll do the Madness of Androsprutz. Do you know this one? Probably not. The Madness of Androsprutz. I first saw the city of Androsprutz on an afternoon in spring. The day was full of sunshine as I came by the way of the fields, and all that morning I had said, "There will be sunlight on it when I see for the first time the beautiful conquered city, whose fame has so often made for me lovely dreams." Suddenly I saw its fortifications lifting out of the fields, and behind them stood its belfries. I went in by a gate, and saw its houses and streets, and a great disappointment came upon me. For there is an air about a city, and it has a way with it whereby a man may recognize one from another at once. There are cities full of happiness, and cities full of pleasure, and cities full of gloom. There are cities with their faces to heaven, and some with their faces to earth. Some have a way of looking at the past, and others look at the future. Some notice you if you come among them. Others glance at you. Others let you go by. Some love the cities that are their neighbors. Others are dear to the plains and to the heath. Some cities are bare to the wind. Others have purple cloaks, and others have brown cloaks, and some are clad in white. Some tell the old tale of their infancy. With others it is secret. Some cities sing, and some mutter. Some are angry, some have broken hearts, and each city has her way of greeting time. I had said, I will see Androsprutz arrogant with her beauty. And I had said, I will see her weeping over her conquest. I had said, she will sing songs to me, and she will be reticent. She will be robed, and she will be bare but splendid. But the windows of Androsprutz in her houses looked vacantly over the plains like the eyes of a dead madman. At the hour her chimes sounded unlovely and discordant. Some of them were out of tune, and the bells of some were cracked. Her roofs were bald and without moss. At evening no pleasant rumor arose in her streets. When the lamps were lit in the houses, no mystical flood of light stole out into the dusk. You merely saw that there were lighted lamps. Androsprutz had no way with her, and no air about her. When the night fell, and the blinds were all drawn down, then I perceived what I had not thought in the daylight. I knew then that Androsprutz was dead. I saw a fair-haired man who drank beer in a cafe, and I said to him, "Why is the city of Androsprutz quite dead, and her soul gone hence?" He answered, "Cities do not have souls, and there is never any life in bricks." And I said to him, "Sir, you have spoken truly." And I asked the same question of another man, and he gave me the same answer, and I thanked him for his courtesy. And I saw a man of a more slender build, who had black hair and channels in his cheeks for tears to run in, and I said to him, "Why is Andelsprutz quite dead, and when did her soul go hence?" And he answered, "Andelsprutz hoped too much. For 30 years would she stretch out her arms toward the land of Akla every night, to Mother Akla, from whom she had been stolen. Every night she would be hoping and sighing and stretching out her arms to Mother Akla. At midnight, once a year, on the anniversary of the terrible day, Akla would send spies to lay a wreath against the walls of Andelsprutz. She could do no more. And on this night, once in every year, I used to weep, for weeping was the mood of the city that nursed me. Every night, while other cities slept, did Andelsprutz sit brooding here and hoping, till 30 wreaths lay mouldering by her walls. And still the armies of Akla could not come. But after she had hoped so long, and on the night that faithful spies had brought her 30th wreath, Andelsprutz went suddenly mad. All the bells clanged hideously in the belfries, horses bolted in the streets, the dogs all howled, the stolid conquerors awoke and turned in their beds and slept again. And I saw the grey, shadowy form of Andelsprutz rise up, decking her hair with the phantoms of cathedrals, and stride away from her city. And the great, shadowy form that was the soul of Andelsprutz went away, muttering to the mountains, and there I followed her, for had she not been my nurse? Yes, I went away alone into the mountains, and for 3 days, wrapped in a cloak, I slept in their misty solitudes. I had no food to eat, and to drink I had only the water of the mountain streams. By day no living thing was near to me, and I heard nothing but the noise of the wind and the mountain streams roaring. But for 3 nights I heard all round me on the mountain the sounds of a great city. I saw the lights of a tall cathedral I saw the lights of tall cathedral windows flash momentarily on the peaks, and at times the glimmering lantern of some fortress patrol. And I saw the huge, misty outline of the soul of Andelsprutz sitting decked with her ghostly cathedrals, speaking to herself, with her eyes fixed before her in a mad stare, telling of ancient wars. And her confused speech for all those nights upon the mountain was sometimes the voice of traffic, and then of church bells, and then of bugles, but oftenest it was the voice of red war, and it was all incoherent, and she was quite mad. The 3rd night it rained heavily all night long, but I stayed up there to watch the soul of my native city. And she still sat staring straight before her, raving. But her voice was gentler now. There were more chimes in it, and occasional song. Midnight passed, and the rain still swept down on me, and still the solitudes of the mountain were full of the mutterings of the poor, mad city. And the hours after midnight came, the cold hours, wherein sick men die. Suddenly I was aware of great shapes moving in the rain, and heard the sound of voices that were not of my city, nor yet of any that I knew. And presently I discerned, though faintly,
the souls of a great concourse of cities, all bending over Andelsprutz and comforting her. And the ravines of the mountains roared that night with the voices of cities that had lain still for centuries. For there came the soul of Camelot, that had so long ago forsaken Usk. And there was Ilion, all girt with towers, still cursing the sweet face of ruinous Helen. I saw there Babylon, and Persepolis, and the bearded face of bull-like Nineveh, and Athens mourning her immortal gods. All these souls of cities that were dead spoke that night on the mountain to my city and soothed her, until at last she muttered of war no longer, and her eyes stared wildly no more. But she hid her face in her hands, and for some while wept softly. At last she arose, and walking slowly, and with bended head, and leaning upon Ilion and Carthage, went mournfully eastwards, and the dust of her highways swirled behind her as she went, a ghostly dust that never turned to mud in all that drenching rain. And so the souls of the cities led her away, and gradually they disappeared from the mountain, and the ancient voices died away in the distance. Not since then have I seen my city alive. But once I met with a traveler who said that somewhere in the midst of a great desert are gathered together the souls of all dead cities. He said that he was lost once in a place where there was no water, and he heard their voices speaking all the night. But I said, I was once without water in a desert, and heard a city speaking to me, but knew not whether it really spoke to me or not, for on that day I heard so many terrible things, and only some of them were true. And the man with the black hair said, I believe it to be true, though whither she went I know not. I only know that a shepherd found me in the morning, faint with hunger and cold, and carried me down here. And when I came to Andelsprutz it was, as you have perceived it, dead. That's a weird one. There we go. Let's do one more. Yeah, a lot of these stories here are kind of I don't know, they've got dead, deserted cities. This other one, that was the madness of Andelsprutz. That one down there, Beth Mura, that's another dead city story. Actually, this one right here, with the tides ebb and flow, yeah, we're going to end up with dead London in this one. It's kind of a, yeah. This is, I guess, like one of his more morbid fantasy books, I guess. There we go. Well, we'll read this one, and I think that'll bring us to the end, I think, where the tides ebb and flow. I dreamt that I had done a horrible thing, so that burial was to be denied me, either in soil or in sea. Neither could there be any hell for me. I waited for some hours, knowing this. Then my friends came for me, and slew me secretly and with ancient rite, and lit great tapers, and carried me away. It was all in London that the thing was done, And they went furtively at dead of night along grey streets and among mean houses until they came to the river. And the river and the tide of the sea were grappling with one another between the mud banks, and both of them were black and full of lights. A sudden wonder came into the eyes of each as my friends came near to them with their glaring tapers. All these things I saw as they carried me dead and stiffening, for my soul was still among my bones, because there was no hell for it, and because Christian burial was denied me. They took me down a stairway that was green with slimy things, and so came slowly to the terrible mud. There, in the territory of forsaken things, they dug a shallow grave. When they had finished, they laid me in the grave, and suddenly they cast their tapers to the river. And when the water had quenched the flaring lights, the tapers looked pale and small as they bobbed upon the tide. And at once the glamour of the calamity was gone, and I noticed then the approach of the huge dawn. And my friends cast their cloaks over their faces, and the solemn procession was turned into many fugitives that furtively stole away. Very grim today, Anya. Then the mud came back wearily and covered all but my face. There I lay, alone with quite forgotten things, with drifting things that the tides will take no farther, with useless things and lost things, and with the horrible, unnatural bricks that are neither stone nor soil. I was rid of feeling, because I had been killed, but the perception and thought were in my unhappy soul. The dawn widened, and I saw the desolate houses that crowded the marge of the river, and their dead windows peered into my dead eyes, windows with bales behind them instead of human souls. I grew so weary looking at these forlorn things that I wanted to cry out, but could not, because I was dead. Then I knew, as I had never known before, that for all the years that herd of desolate houses had wanted to cry out too, but being dead were dumb. And I knew then that it had yet been well with the forgotten drifting things if they had wept, but they were eyeless and without life. And I, too, tried to weep, but there were no tears in my dead eyes. And I knew then that the river might have cared for us, might have caressed us, might have sung to us, but he swept broadly onwards, thinking of nothing but the princely ships. At last the tide did what the river would not, and came and covered me over, and my soul had rest in the green water, and rejoiced, and believed that it had the burial of the sea. But with the ebb the water fell again, and left me alone again with the callous mud among the forgotten things that drift no more, and with the sight of all those desolate houses, and with the knowledge among all of us that each was dead. In the mournful wall behind me, hung with green weeds, forsaken of the sea, dark tunnels appeared, and secret, narrow passages that were clamped and barred. From these, at last, the stealthy rats came down to nibble me away, and my soul rejoiced thereat, and believed that he would be free perforce from the accursed bones to which burial was refused. Very soon the rats ran away a little space, and whispered among themselves. They never came any more. when I found that I was accursed even among the rats, I tried to weep again. Then the tide came swinging back and covered the dreadful mud, and hid the desolate houses, and soothed the forgotten things, and my soul had ease for a while in the sepulchre of the sea. And then the tide forsook me again. To and fro it came about me for many years. Then the county council found me, and gave me decent burial. It was the first grave that I had ever slept in. That very night my friends came for me. They dug me up and put me back again in the shallow hold of the mud. Again and again through the years my bones found burial, but always behind the funeral lurked one of those terrible men who, as soon as night fell, came and dug them up and carried them back again to the hole in the mud. And then one day the last of those men died who had once done to me this terrible thing. I heard his soul go over the river at sunset. And again I hoped. A few weeks afterwards I was found once more, and once more taken out of that restless place and given deep burial in sacred ground, where my soul hoped that it should rest. Almost at once men came with cloaks and tapers to give me back to the mud, for the thing had become a tradition and a rite. And all the forsaken things mocked me in their dumb hearts when they saw me carried back, for they were jealous of me, because I had left the mud. It must be remembered I could not weep. And the years went by, seawards, where the black barges go, and the great derelict centuries became lost at sea, and still I lay there, without any cause to hope, and daring not to hope without a cause, because of the terrible envy and the anger of the things that could drift no more. Once a great storm rode up, even as far as London, out of the sea from the south, and he came curving into the river with the fierce east wind. And he was mightier than the dreary tides, and went with great leaps over the listless mud. And all the sad forgotten things rejoiced, and mingled with things that were haughtier than they, and rode once more amongst the lordly shipping that was driven up and down. And out of their hideous home he took my bones. Never again, I hoped, to be vexed with the ebb and flow. And with the fall of the tide he went riding down the river, and turned to the southwards, and so went to his home. And my bones he scattered among many isles, and along the shores of happy alien mainlands. And for a moment, while they were far asunder, my soul was almost free. Then there arose, at the will of the moon, the assiduous flow of the tide, and it undid at once the work of the ebb, and gathered my bones from the marge of sunny isles, and gleamed them all along the mainland's shores, and went rocking northward till it came to the mouth of the Thames, and there turned westwards its relentless face, and so went up the river, and came to the hole in the mud, and into it dropped my bones. And partly the mud covered them, and partly it left them white. For the mud cares not for its forsaken things. Then the ebb came, And I saw the dead eyes of the houses, and the jealousy of the other forgotten things that the storm had not carried thence. And some more centuries passed over the ebb and flow, and over the loneliness of things forgotten. And I lay there all the while in the careless grip of the mud, never wholly covered, yet never able to go free. And I longed for the great caress of the warm earth or the comfortable lap of the sea. Sometimes men found my bones and buried them. But the tradition never died, and my friends' successors always brought them back. At last the barges went no more, and there were fewer lights. Shaped timbers no longer floated down the fairway, and there came instead old, wind-uprooted trees in all their natural simplicity. At last I was aware that somewhere near me a blade of grass was growing, and the moss began to appear all over the dead houses. One day some thistledown went drifting over the river. For some years I watched these signs attentively, until I became certain that London was passing away. Then I hoped once more, and all along both banks of the river there was anger among the lost things that anything should dare to hope upon the forsaken mud. Gradually the horrible houses crumbled, until the poor dead things that never had had life got decent burial among the weeds and moss. At last the May appeared, and the convolvulus. Finally the wild rose stood up over mounds that had been wharves and warehouses. Then I knew that the cause of nature had triumphed, and London had passed away. The last man in London came to the wall by the river, in an ancient cloak that was one of those that once my friends had worn, and peered over the edge to see that I was still there. Then he went, and I never saw men again. They had passed away with London. A few days after the last man had gone, the birds came into London, all the birds that sing. When they first saw me, they all looked sideways at me. Then they went away a little and spoke among themselves. "He only sinned against man," they said. "It is not our quarrel." "Let us be kind to him," they said. Then they hopped nearer me and began to sing. It was the time of the rising of the dawn, and from both banks of the river, and from the sky, and from the thickets that were once the streets, hundreds of birds were singing. As the light increased, the birds sang more and more. They grew thicker and thicker in the air above my head, till there were thousands of them singing there, and then millions. And at last I could see nothing but a host of flickering wings with the sunlight on them, and little gaps of sky. Then, when there was nothing to be heard in London but the myriad notes of that exultant song, my soul rose up from the bones in the hole in the mud and began to climb heavenwards. And it seemed that a laneway opened amongst the wings of the birds, and it went up and up, and one of the smaller gates of paradise stood ajar at the end of it. And then I knew by a sign that the mud should receive me no more. For suddenly I found that I could weep. At this moment I opened my eyes in bed in a house in London, and outside some sparrows were twittering in a tree in the light of the radiant morning. And there were tears still wet upon my face, for one's restraint is feeble while one sleeps. But I arose and opened the window wide, and stretching my hands out over the little garden, I blessed the birds whose song had woken me up from the troubled and terrible centuries of my dream.
You know, it's a really interesting story. Like through most of it, but I really don't like the way that one ends. Don't like that. But it's just like, oh, and then I woke up and I was in bed. The whole thing was just a dream. So okay, I guess so. That ended on a cheery note. Then all that gloomy stuff was just a dream. That was that. That was that. Oh. That is it for that's our book club for today, though. It is. It's been a good time. Man, oh man. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I did mention, December is turned into actually quite a busy month here. So we're going to have a little hiatus from book club. We'll still have Short Story Sunday over on Twitch. Still have that over on Short Story Sunday. I will be uploading some stuff to a YouTube, so there'll still be interesting things going on there. You think that's a guilty conscience? Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it is. They're definitely guilty. But boy, oh boy, how many books? I don't know. I lost track of how many books we've read this year. It's got to, I'd say about 30. I would think that Amazon counter thing that I have, that only went up to 20, and I know we've read a bunch more than that. I don't know. Well, he wrote a bunch of. He's written a bunch of stories about. They never really say what the deed is. Do you remember the one about the Sphinx, where the guy is running through the forest to get away from, is being pursued by something, and they find the house in the forest, and inside it is the Sphinx, and there are the two other travelers in it, and everyone knows about the deed. Is it in this? I don't know if it's in this particular thing. Let me pull it up real fast. One second. Is it Dreamer's Tales? The Sphinx. No, it's not that one. One second. Where is it? Where it at? 10. One second. I gotta find this thing. This is Dunsany. D-U-N. The Book of Wonder. That's what it's in. The Book of Wonder. Yeah, and I'm not going to read the whole thing here. With my thing here. Let's see. Turn that Kindle back on. There we go. Yeah. So I mean, like this one right here, right at the very start here, the house of the Sphinx. When I came to the house of the Sphinx, it was already dark. They made me eagerly welcome. And I, in spite of the deed, was glad of any shelter from that ominous wood. I saw at once that there had been a deed, although a cloak did all that a cloak may do to conceal it. And they talk about the deed. several more times on this. Yeah. This is Lord Dunsany. Yeah, you gotta check his bio. Oh, he's probably thankful. He wasn't living in France, being a lord and aristocrat, English one, but no, is he Irish? I think it might be Irish actually. But yeah, he does like a lot of that real like just hinting at stuff kind of things. It does make it kind of interesting. That's right, Dr. B Games. What's up? Makes you think what it is. That's right. Just a guilty conscience in general. Anyway, so thanks for tuning in, and like I said, this is going to be the last book club I got to getting caught up on a few things. December, and then rolling right into Christmas and the like. So, but yeah, we will get back on track. Get back on track as soon as I can. You're going to check for cold cases, and oh boy, you think he's that he's that guilty. But there we go. Everyone have a great day. Have a great day. We'll see you Thursday on Twitch. Yeah, Thursday on Twitch. I think that'll be it. And of course, yeah, we'll still be we'll still be tearing it up in Discord. Yeah. All right, BWH, Anya, you two have a great day. Check his cellar for loose dirt, man. All kind of things. Dr. B Games, goodbye, and thank you for coming in, Melissa and William. Melissa and William, yeah, I think they're still with us. Baghdad Money was he popped in a little earlier as well. So did Timo, our friend Timo. Man, oh man. Anyway, yeah, boy, but that was a great book to end with. By the way, that Tale of Two Cities. But man, those last 4 or 5 pages were hard to read, very hard to read. But there we go. Catch you all later. See you later, alligator.